Corridors, Part 6, Hermes.
My name is Ambassador Tyler Evans. I am human. Most of you may have heard of my species. Many of you have not heard of me specifically, and even fewer of you have seen me. Let me tell you something about humans. Humans can be fickle. We can be conniving, judgmental, and greedy. We can be bigots, warmongers, racists, and fanatics. We've fought amongst ourselves for looking slightly different, for holding different beliefs, for being richer or poorer than one another, and then we fought again for vengeance and retribution. But a long time ago, we decided that enough was enough. We refused to give in to our primal natures and chose to be better. No longer would we give in to our baser instincts. We chose to embrace differences, not destroy them. We decided to embark on a path of compassion, beauty, and community. We realized that individuals are not merely a part of a community. Individuals mold and shape communities. Because of this, the value of a single life is immeasurable. And through all of our revelations, we finally understood what it meant to be human. We are no longer conquerors. We are defenders and builders. And now I would like to include all of you in the biggest construction project in known space. We will not be building a new space station, nor a ship, nor a vessel. Together, we will be rebuilding the Draconal Republic. Humanity hereby extends an invitation to all the Draconal survivors in the Onathins sovereignty and the Credith Dominion, and welcomes you to Earth, our homeworld. No longer will you wander restlessly through the voids in sorrow, or wallow in squalor on miserable worlds when your fuel runs out. The oceans of Earth welcome you. Come here and form a new community, a new home. Do not sing your lamentations for a lost and destroyed world. Sing your relief, your euphoria at finding a bright beacon in the overwhelming darkness. Sing a song of hope. Sing a song of humanity. Sing for my name, and we will find you and bring you home.
Tara Yang smiled as the shuttle pulled away from Earth. The majestic oceans gradually shrank as the shuttle approached Earthshine Station, and somewhere in the largest ocean of them all, a happy Draconal was busy exploring his new home. After purging his internal digestive tract of microorganisms, Tara had given him the green light to explore the Pacific Ocean. He was churning about in his tank excitedly as they brought him to the beach, eager to begin his new life. After briefly washing his rescuers with grateful emotions, he propelled himself out of the tank and dove into the ocean. The roar of the ocean waves transformed into a shudder as the shuttle docked with Earthshine Station. Located at the L1 Lagrangian point between Earth and its moon, Earthshine Station featured 3 habitat rings, all connected by a singular shaft that was used by its inhabitants to travel from one ring to another. The habitat rings each encircled a small hangar, except for the middle ring, which encircled a spherical trade hub, named after Earth's luminous glow as seen from the moon. Earthshine Station was humanity's first spaceborne construction project since the International Space Station. Its 2 hangars built all of the civilian commerce fleet to date: 82 mining vessels, 27 cargo ships, and 49 passenger ships. The trade hub was an essential linchpin for the survival of the lunar colony, allowing ore resources mined on the moon to be quickly traded for food and water from Earth. Derek and Tara walked out of the shuttle airlock and entered the trade hub sphere. Although the station was small, with all 3 habitat rings measuring less than 3 kilometers in diameter, the space was well utilized, with cargo containers stacked high into the domed ceilings. Derek kept bumping into people as he and Tara made their way through the narrow streets to the transport shaft. They stopped by the doors of the transport taxis and kissed.
"I'll miss you,"
Derek said softly.
"Take care of yourself. I won't be there to fix you if you hurt yourself again,"
Tara replied. She softly pressed her handheld bioscanner into Derek's hands.
"Be careful."
"Thanks, but I'm not giving you my Omni tool."
Derek grinned stupidly.
"And you be careful too. Who knows what hungry and sick Draconal are capable of."
Hugging him one last time, Tara stepped into the transport taxi and was whisked away. Derek watched her leave before stepping into another taxi headed the other way. At opposite ends of the station, 2 new cargo ships floated in the small hangars. The Nightingale was not yet fully constructed and slept restlessly in the Earth-facing hangar. Tara entered a small meeting room overlooking the hangar and was greeted by Ambassador Evans.
Dr. Yang, thanks for agreeing to come on this trip.
Evans began.
I thought it would be a good idea to have the Council's chief xenobiologist along for the ride.
Of course. Who else can you trust to make sure the Draconals survive on the way back to Earth after we pick them up with the Nightingale? So where are we going first?
Tara dug into her bag and pulled out a small computer tablet and peered at a star map of the Onathin sovereignty.
We're going to all of the outlying systems.
Evans looked warily around the room.
And we're not just looking for Draconal. We're going to be using the opportunity that the first prelate has given us to travel freely in sovereignty space, to open up trade discussions with the outer systems.
Tara nodded conspiratorially.
And you hope that in doing so, we would establish stable corridors with those systems, just like what we did to facilitate trade with Sakala?
Correct. The first prelate knows the capabilities of the Pathfinder probes, but still prefers to use interstellar engines to drive sovereignty trade.
Evans pointed to Tara's star map.
Traditionally, trade flows between the inner systems and the outer systems because their ships can't hold enough fuel to jump between the outer systems.
Tara studied the star map. The Onathins had, more or less, colonized outwards like an expanding sphere. The farther a system was from the Onathin homeworld, the farther it was from any other Onathin system. It was like drawing dots on a balloon. As the balloon fills with air and expands, the dots get further and further apart from each other. After a certain distance, the outer systems become isolated, forcing ships to travel inwards towards the Onathin homeworld and hop to another inner system before it can travel to another outer system. Evans continued.
If we show the Onathin traders how much more efficient trade can be with our Pathfinder technology, it'll lead to more widespread use of our probes.
Tara nodded as she remembered that the time it took for a Pathfinder probe to travel to Sakala was now 3 hours, instead of 5.5 like the first time. With more trade, this travel time would only decrease further.
And then we can sell the Pathfinder probes to the Onathins at a profit. That's great.
It would also give us quick and easy access to most of the Onathin sovereignty systems, if we ever need it.
Evans sat down with a sigh.
And right now, all of the generals think that we definitely will need it. After speaking to the first prelate and the war ambassador of the Credith, I agree with the generals.
Tara wistfully pulled up a view of the other cargo vessel in the moon-facing hangar of Earthshine Station, worrying about Derek. The Hermes had been rushed into completion. General Davis somehow found enough people to complete 3 weeks' worth of construction in 5 days. Tara wondered if he had to pause construction of the forge to acquire the manpower and resources to do this. Regardless, the Hermes gleamed in the lights of the hangar, twinkling with lights cast by last-minute welding. Hermes was initially designed as a simple cargo ship. Like the Nightingale, it featured 2 large cargo containers located near the middle of the vessel, and 2 large sublight engines in the rear, all connected to a small fusion reactor in the middle. The cargo containers each had hatchways that could mate with Onathin airlocks, and were connected to the bridge by a walkway that ran between them. After seeing the state of the war, the generals insisted on some modifications. First, armor was plated over most of the ship. Instead of 1 Pathfinder probe launcher, there were now 2, one attached directly to each cargo hold. And instead of the usual cargo of food, water, and building supplies, both cargo holds were filled with 500 Pathfinder probes each. Instead of worrying about relieving the refugees, Hermes would just focus on getting them to a safe system first, and then figure out how to deal with them. The 200-meter-long vessel was going to be heavy, but had enough autonomous systems so that a crew of 2 could easily pilot the ship. Alan strode onto the bridge of the Hermes, while Derek continued yelling at a technician.
What do you mean you haven't calibrated the sublight engines yet?
Derek snatched a device from the technician.
Give me the calibrator, I'll do it myself.
The technician scurried away under Derek's glare.
Are we going to make it?
Alan asked nervously.
Yeah, it'll take a sec. Lousy slacker that techie was.
Derek waved the device over to the sublight engines and entered some commands on a nearby console.
All right, I'm closing the cargo hatches. Are we good to go?
Alan asked.
Just a minute.
You know the corridor is stabilizing in a couple of minutes, right? If we miss it, we're going to have to launch another long-range Pathfinder and wait 5 days for it to get to the Renteller star cluster.
Well, if I don't properly calibrate these engines, we'll go spinning into the side of Earthshine Station.
Derek fiddled some more with the calibrator.
Oh, done. Punch it!
The hum of the sublight engines began to crescendo as Alan expertly guided Hermes out of the hangar, and then raced toward a softly glowing white ember in the asteroid belt.
Are we going to make it?
Derek asked nervously.
I'm not sure. It'll be close.
Alan gripped the controls with white-knuckled anxiety.
Derek, what happens if the corridor stabilizes and half of the ship is outside the superposition field while the other half is inside?
Bad things. Bad things would happen. I really don't want to find out.
Derek replied. Ahead of them, the glowing white ember of the Pathfinder probe suddenly lit up, expanding outwards in a brilliant sphere of light.
Damn that lazy techie.
Derek yelled as Alan managed to just get Hermes into the corridor before it vanished. A moment later, the Hermes was deposited into the head of the Pathfinder probe in the Renteller star cluster, promptly causing it to explode in a dazzling blaze of white light. Alan checked his navigational instruments.
We're a tiny bit off course, but we still made it to the Zedran system,
Alan informed. He breathed a sigh of relief. Derek walked to the bridge on unsteady legs and sat down in front of what he liked to call the weapons console, which only controlled the Pathfinder probe launchers.
All right, I'll start launching the probes when we get to the planet. Winyan system should be about 4 hours away.
As they neared the planet, small, reddish-silver ships could be seen streaming out from the surface. The lines of ships reached out to a certain distance from the planet before flashing and shooting off into space, leaving wakes of white light flowing in their wakes. Derek was puzzled. The number of ships leaving the system wasn't even close to the numbers needed if the entire colony was to be evacuated. He quickly scanned the system. The sensors indicated 2 gas giants in the outer system, a large asteroid belt with 4 large shipyards, hundreds of small ships throughout the asteroid belt, and 3 other barren, terrestrial worlds, but only a few dozen ships leaving the colonized planet. Alan's console beeped.
We're being hailed by the Zedran 4 colony.
A string of raspy clicks, growls, and screeches streamed out of the bridge speakers. Derek tapped the translator with his Omni tool, and the screeches dissolved into English.
Vessel, halt your advance toward the planet at once. Unidentified vessel, this is your last warning.
Alan quickly flipped a few switches, and an insectoid face materialized on the view screen before them.
Oh, you're human.
The Cretith said, antennae standing up straight in surprise.
Forgive me, I haven't seen one of your ships before. I am Colony Keeper Rixia.
That's quite all right. Our ships don't usually travel this far from Earth.
Alan replied.
I'm Alan Radisson, the, ambassadorial pilot.
He wondered briefly what his new rank would be, now that Earth's entire military was about to integrate into one force. He gestured to his companion.
This is Derek Yang, Earth Council's lead engineer on the Pathfinder project.
Pardon me, Mom,
Derek jumped in.
but I've noticed that you don't seem to be evacuating the colony. Was there not an evacuation order?
Why would there need to be an evacuation order?
Colony Keeper Rixia asked.
Our fleets are currently holding the Forsaken at bay in the Sidir system.
Alan and Derek exchanged glances.
Well, our orders are to assist with the evacuation of Zedran 4, and we still intend to carry out those orders.
Alan informed.
We're going to launch a series of Pathfinder probes in orbit that will take ships to the Winyan system.
Colony Keeper Rixia started to say something, but Derek cut her off.
It's okay if you don't want to evacuate right now. These probes still need 4 hours to travel to the Winyan system. Just be at these coordinates in 4 hours and they'll take you there. You won't even need an interstellar engine. We'll also drop a couple probes at the asteroid belt for your civilian fleets.
Colony Keeper Rixia waved her antennae in confused gratitude.
I thank you, humans, for the kind offer. I'll pass on the information to the colony so that the colonists can make their own decisions to evacuate. Are you sure this is really necessary?
Call it a precaution.
Alan suggested. 2 insistent blips drew his attention to the system-wide scanners. A pair of red dots were highlighted, sprinting through the system.
Forsaken scout ships.
Colony Keeper Rixia gnashed her mandibles.
Perhaps precautions are necessary after all. I shall begin preparing the hive seed for launch. May your enemies fall before you, humans.
The transmission ended. Derek watched as the pair of Forsaken Shadow Spike fighters neared a Lagrangian point weapons array in the asteroid belt, which emitted a salvo of 5 brilliant beams of light, annihilating both ships. Alan looked at Derek nervously.
Better get those Pathfinders launched. Scout ships mean a vanguard force is imminent. We don't want to be here for that.
Agreed.
Derek accessed a few commands on his console and fired a series of 50 Pathfinder probes above the Zedron 4V colony. He fired an extra one for themselves. War Ambassador Raxon moisturized his thorax with one of his 4 arms, while issuing commands to the fleet with his other 3.
I want all remaining swarm ships to chase those retreating Forsaken. Destroy as many as you can before they activate their interstellar engines.
The second credit swarm host bore down on a shattered Forsaken fleet. Husks of destroyed dreadnoughts floated uselessly in space, occasionally casting a purple flash onto the surrounding wreckage as damaged reactors exploded. Jagged chunks of void blades spun aimlessly, colliding with each other and adding shrapnel to the surrounding debris of destroyed Shadow Spike fighters.
Fleet status.
War Ambassador Raxon ordered, as he rubbed his antennae together and surveyed the glorious sight of a well-won battle. A polite whistle informed,
There are 232 swarm ships and 57 carrier hives in fighting form, as well as 120 talent shards, 37 predators, and 15 nest ships remaining in the first Onathin fleet.
Excellent.
Raxon replied. He pulled up a star map of the Renteller star cluster and marked the Parhill system clear of Forsaken forces.
Signal the fleet to set a course for the Einan system and engage interstellar engines.
The Forsaken now only controlled 2 systems out of the 18 systems in the Renteller star cluster. Now, the first Credith swarm host was engaging the Forsaken in the Sidir system, and the second Credith swarm host, along with the first Onathin fleet, was about to push them out of the Einan system as well. Soon, the entire star cluster will be secured again. War Ambassador Raxon's mandibles drooled as he thought about all the death and destruction that his fleet had wrought upon the dark Forsaken ships. The warnings that the human ambassador had given him 5 days ago were entirely unfounded. He examined the star map while the fleet jumped into superspace towards the Einan system. Ambassador Evans had cautioned that the Forsaken were massing forces to break into the Credith home cluster. But this was only possible by taking the Greed system to gain access to the Wynyan system in the home cluster. To take Greeds, the Forsaken would have to take Zedran, which is only accessible through Sidir, Dressel, and Nessun. Although scout ships and vanguard forces are regularly seen in Dressel and Nessun, they were usually quickly dealt with by the second Onathin fleet, leaving the only Forsaken force of real threat in Sidir. Raxon went through Ambassador Evans' warnings in his head. The Forsaken were intentionally giving up the Uhosed, Sidrek, and Petitris systems. Preposterous. Why would the enemy give up such high-value systems that gave them access to 15 other systems in the Renteller star cluster? The humans' reason for this unusual behavior seemed even more outrageous. Without even knowing where the Credith and Onathin fleets were, he had boldly stated that the Forsaken were pulling us out of position, he thought derisively. Granted, these systems were on the other side of the star cluster, far from the Sidir Zedran Greed star lane, but there were no signs that the Forsaken fleet could be as large as what the human envisioned them to be. If there was trouble, War Ambassador Raxon was certain that he could travel back in time to defend that critical star lane.
We're approaching Einan.
A battle drone clicked.
Good. Prepare to launch the swarm ships out of the carrier hives. Tell the Onathins to start charging their photon lances.
War Ambassador Raxon ordered. Over 100 flashes of brilliant light washed over the Einan system asteroid belt as the first Onathin fleet and the second Credith swarm host dropped back into normal space. Immediately, fighters began deploying from the nest ships and carrier hives. They fell upon the remaining Forsaken forces with a vengeance. Swarm ships shot bursts of yellow plasma at shadow spikes, destroying them as they tried to flee the system. Damaged void blades weakly fired their purple lasers, wiping out a few swarm ships before succumbing to the hail of plasma and photon lances. A battle drone screeched in response to an incoming message.
War Ambassador, The first Kredith swarm host in the Sadir system reports massive enemy forces preparing to attack.
Raxon spun around in his webbing harness.
Give me details. How many ships?
2,400 shadow spikes, 930 void blades, and 425 dreadnoughts.
The battle drone's antennae retracted with fear. 425 dreadnoughts. War Ambassador Araxon suddenly realized that there were only a few enemy ships in the Einan system, despite its close proximity to the former Draconal Republic, now held by the Forsaken. The human was right, after all.
Signal the fleet to set a course for Sadir, now!
Raxon demanded, knowing it would take a full rotation to get to the Sadir system at the best possible speed.
How long until the probes reach Wenyan?
Derek asked as he watched the Kredith ships stream out of the planet. The offer for free travel into Winyan, coupled with the Forsaken scout ships, seemed to have spurred more citizens to evacuate Zedron 4.
In about 45 minutes.
Alan looked at the view screen, which was currently showing a magnified image of the Zedron 4 colony. The colony was writhing in activity. Buildings and towers were slowly withdrawing towards the center spire of the colony. Tendrils anchoring the city to the planet were retracting from the ground, leaving undulating radial marks on the surface as they drew back to the center spire. As the amorphous buildings drew closer, they began to secrete a mucus-like fluid that hardened into a dome, eventually encompassing the entire colony in a thick, translucent, and slightly slimy shell. Then it started to rise.
How can something that massive ever leave the planet?
Derek asked in wonder. He was answered by a swarm of small Kredith ships that buzzed out of the hive seed and began to encircle the hive seed while emitting a faint distortion.
Oh, of course. Anti-gravity beams.
Slowly but steadily, the colony moved into planetary orbit. An alarm went off, jolting Alan and Derek from the spectacular sight.
That's a Forsaken Vanguard force. They're here ahead of schedule.
Crap.
Derek checked the system-wide sensors.
And there are no friendly fleets in the system to fight them off, unless that hive seed has weapons.
I wouldn't even know what to look for.
Alan replied.
Neither the Onathins nor the Kredith ever shared any weapon technologies with us.
A satellite hanging in orbit over Zedron 4 spun to life. An elongated tube-like projection sat atop a more bulbous compartment. The elongated projection rotated towards the Forsaken fleet, before glowing briefly and firing a white-hot stream of light.
Whoa, that's like a giant laser or something.
Derek yelled. He looked at the system-wide sensors again and noticed a giant red dot had disappeared. Moments later, he saw a faint flash from the direction of the Forsaken fleet. A transmission came in.
Ambassadorial pilot, Alan Radisson.
Colony Keeper Rixia clicked.
When will the corridors to Winyan open?
In about 40 minutes. Can your laser satellite fend off those ships?
The photon lance will cause some damage, but will not be able to destroy the Forsaken force by itself. I will begin activating the Hive Seed's interstellar engine.
Colony Keeper Rixia replied. Behind her, Derek could see that the civilian ships were doing the same. However, the Forsaken fleet had altered course to intercept them. He watched in horror as the shadow spikes caught up to the civilian ships, merged their superposition fields into one, overloaded the civilian ships' interstellar engines, and dropped them into normal space. Then they came back around and destroyed the Kredith ships in a hail of purple pulses. Colony Keeper Rixia gnashed her mandibles at the sight.
We'll have to make our stand here and wait for the corridors.
She turned to the humans.
If it were not for your timely arrival, all would have been lost.
All might still be lost.
Alan replied bitterly. This wasn't how he wanted to die. Sure, he was in space flying a spaceship, but he had no weapons to defend himself with. He wanted to go down fighting. The Hive Seed was now in orbit over the planet, and about to head into the coordinates of one of the launched Pathfinder probes. The orbital photon lance fired again, destroying a Shadow Spike fighter and damaging a Void Blade. Derek checked the screen. 3 dreadnoughts, 9 Void Blades, 23 Shadow Spike fighters. A newly built swarm ship rose up from the shipyards. Without any weapons, it charged toward the Forsaken Vanguard. The Hive Seed must survive. The pilot yelled into space. Derek watched several other civilian craft begin to do the same. Before they could even get close to the Forsaken ships, however, they were destroyed by a combination of void blade lasers and dreadnought anti-fighter pulses. Unrelenting, the Vanguard force ignored the out-of-range Lagrangian point weapons array and closed in on the recharging photon lance. With a barrage of plasma pulses, the satellite exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Alan engaged the sublight engines and headed towards the Forsaken.
What are you doing?
Derek yelled.
I can't just sit here waiting to die. I need to do something. I need to hurt them for what they are doing to the Cretith.
Alan yelled back.
I don't care if we don't have any weapons. I am a fighter pilot, and I'm going to get us close to one of those big ships, and we're going to destroy it somehow.
Alan, wait.
Derek looked down at his console.
Wait for what, Derek?
Alan looked back and was surprised to find a mischievous grin on Derek's face.
For me to make some weapons.
Derek hurriedly began to enter a series of commands into his console, muttering to himself absently as he performed calculations in his head. He pressed a few more buttons, then hopped out of his seat and sprinted to the sublight engines, brandishing his Omni tool as we went.
What are you doing?
Alan asked, circling the Hermes around the hive seat in anticipation for the oncoming Forsaken fleet.
I just have to make some modifications to the sublight engines. I need to disable some of the safeties to give you more maneuverability.
But what about weapons?
Derek slipped his Omni tool back into his pocket as he sprinted back and hopped in his seat.
I'm done.
He looked at Alan's puzzled face and realized how confused he must be.
The Pathfinders, Alan. We'll use them as weapons. Remember how we almost missed the corridor back in Seoul?
Alan's puzzled look turned into an adventurous smirk as he guided the ship toward the Forsaken fleet.
Let's find out what happens when you don't completely miss a corridor, shall we?
Derek launched a Pathfinder probe and set the destination as the location of the lead dreadnought. A flash of light was followed by another as the Pathfinder probe almost immediately arrived at the destination and stabilized the corridor to the dreadnought. Alan punched the sublight engines and crossed through the corridor and pulled sharply on the controls as the Hermes appeared a few hundred meters away from the dreadnought. He narrowly avoided crashing into the capital ship and began to fly along its hull.
They don't know what happened yet. They're not firing at us.
Alan shouted in excitement.
But we're going to fire at them.
Derek entered a series of commands and fired a barrage of Pathfinder probes into the side of the dreadnought as Alan flew along its hull. Bright white spheres expanded from the glowing white embers left by the Pathfinders, partially bathing the dreadnought in brilliance before disappearing. Derek cheered as chunks of the lead dreadnought suddenly appeared right beside a second dreadnought, crashing into it and crumpling its hull. Alan looked backward and saw that a line of perfectly spherical sections had been carved along the side of the lead dreadnought, exposing networks of purple wiring and power cells. The wiring began to explode as the power cells were now suddenly overloaded, causing minor secondary explosions in the engines. The lead dreadnought ground to a halt. A void blade turned to face them and fired its lasers as Alan swerved. The lasers grazed Hermes, sending sparks showering along the bridge.
We're okay, the armor held.
Derek informed.
Firing another probe. Get ready.
Another probe was launched, and another corridor stabilized. Alan flew into it and expertly avoided another collision with the third dreadnought, which had begun launching shadow spikes to chase them. At such close range, Alan realized that the dreadnought turrets couldn't swivel fast enough to track Hermes as it flew along its hull. He smirked again as he started to encircle around the dreadnought to shake off the shadow spikes.
Firing more probes in front of us. I'm targeting the second dreadnought again.
A corridor stabilized and engulfed Hermes and its pursuers, depositing them at the second dreadnought at an even closer proximity. Slamming on the brakes, Alan pitched the Hermes downwards, hearing the whine of the sublight engines, and accelerated again to avoid collision. The 15 shadow spikes that were pulled through the corridor were not so prepared, and slammed into the second dreadnought like 15 ballistic missiles. Secondary explosions rocked the dreadnought's weapons arrays, and it began to spiral out of control. Alan piloted Hermes towards the rear of the second dreadnought, using its mass as cover from Voidblade fire. Derek fired a series of Pathfinders along the dreadnought, before firing 5 additional probes directly at the engines. After the white spheres subsided, globes of detached dreadnought pieces impacted into the third dreadnought, denting and crumpling its outer hull, before a group of dissected engine pieces appeared and exploded in the middle of the dent. The ensuing massive purple detonation split the third dreadnought into two pieces, one of which exploded again, destroying 3 of the escorting void blades. Another void blade was waiting for them as they cleared the hulk of the second dreadnought and fired its dual lasers at them. Alan swerved, but couldn't avoid the lasers as they swept by, burning through one of the cargo holds. Derek covered his face as screens exploded around him and checked his console again. The port cargo hold was destroyed, and its Pathfinder probes shot out into space from depressurization. Alan hastily sealed the port cargo hold security door to prevent their atmosphere from leaking out into space.
Are you all right, Derek?
I'm fine, but we just lost the port cargo hold and launcher.
Derek suddenly smiled.
But maybe that's a good thing.
His fingers danced over the console with practiced precision. Outside, the remaining void blades closed in on Hermes, when a sudden flash of light heralded the arrival of over 200 Pathfinder probes that had been leaked into space. These probes initiated corridors all around the Hermes, sending pieces of void blades into the first lid dreadnought. The pieces of crescent-shaped ships sliced and diced into the exposed recesses of the dreadnought, promptly causing massive explosions that lashed out and destroyed 6 more shadow spikes. The 2 remaining shadow spikes began a ballistic charge towards the Hermes. Alan dodged their plasma bursts while Derek deftly launched another probe, sending 1 shadow spike into the other with ease. Together, Alan and Derek looked at the view screen, marveling at the amount of destruction they had caused.
I hope those Cretans don't tell anyone what happened here.
Alan said.
Why not? It was awesome.
Derek exclaimed.
If they did, I don't think the Onathins would let us launch another Pathfinder in sovereignty space again.
Alan chuckled. Their mirth was interrupted by a series of blips. The system-wide sensor showed new red dots appearing, seemingly from the direction of the Sadir system. The blips soon dissolved into a constant drone as thousands of ships continuously dropped into normal space.
I think it's time to go.
Derek said quietly.
Yep. The corridor to Winyan is about to stabilize.
Alan said as Derek launched a probe to take them back to the planet instantly. 50 brilliant spheres of white light stretched out in the skies above Zedron 4th, enveloping thousands of small civilian spacecraft and 1 giant Hyviside, and depositing them safely in the Winyan system. Hermes headed into the 51st,